Well, good evening, listeners. Such a gift. I'm excited to be back on here recording interviews. It's been a little bit of a break with wedding festivities for a relative and just a whole bunch of things, but super grateful to be here with Julie M. Green. I found out about her work through a publicist who reached out to me and told me about her book, Motherness. Um, and she talks about being diagnosed with autism later on in life. So it's not something that happened while she was a kid. It was something that she found out as an adult. And she also has an autistic son. And so she talks about this journey in her book. And I actually recently had been in a conversation with a friend of mine, and she told me, "Hey, I just recently found out I've been diagnosed with this, and I'm older now, and it's explained a lot for me." But um, I've just been hearing more and more conversations with people about this, that people are learning about it later in life. And I thought, this is so cool that there's a book on it. Someone wants to come out and
Mhm.
talk about it with their story. And so I have Julie M. Green on today because I want her to talk about it and share her story and hopefully encourage you guys to get her book as well. It's become an audiobook recently
Mhm.
as well. So if you want to listen to it as opposed to read it, she's holding it up in the video. And if you're listening, it's called Motherness. She also has her website, which I will link to the bottom of the podcast, and that has all of her books as well as a bio, and you can check it out. But Julie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start out with, this is a vulnerable thing to share. And I know that we are in a society that is encouraging authenticity in many areas, but it does discourage it in others. So it's not always completely balanced on the authentic side of things. But at the same time, I would think for you in your personal life as well as just publicly, this would be a big thing to share and to talk about. Why did you feel like this was important? And do you feel at peace with the fact that you've written this and it's out in the world, or has it been hard with the feedback you've received?
Yeah, I tell people it's a strange thing. I mean, on one level, writing is so private and personal. You're locked in this room doing your
Yeah.
thing. And for me, a lot of this was just processing this discovery. I've written about parenting for many, many years, but to actually process my own diagnosis um, was, as I said, a process. But as I was writing that, I think that's the thing with memoir, this very intensely personal experience. Eventually, you realize, look, there's an upshot to sharing that, and maybe it is worth doing if it helps other people. Although, as you say, there are moments like, I think for some reason, it didn't really occur to me until suddenly the book was released. I mean, in 2 years of editing and this whole process, I objectively, I guess, knew it was going to happen. But then when it is out in the world, it's like, oh, it really is. All these stories are out there. Um, so yeah, in a way, it is kind of an uncomfortable realization, but that's tempered by the idea that people have already said to me, "Oh my gosh, like I've cried a couple times, I've folded pages, I feel really seen." That was part of my motivation to do it because not just as a parent, but I mean, my son was diagnosed at 3, and at the time, I felt so isolated. It was such a learning curve for me. And then even among friends later who also were within this community, we felt like kind of another layer of isolation. And so as a parent, there's I feel like a lot of that in the autism community of feeling isolated and even within friends and family didn't fully understand some of the things we were going through. Um, and then obviously as an adult in my own right, having this realization in my mid 40s,
Yeah.
this is something that is happening more and more. And it's not to underscore the point, but it is life changing. It really flips everything you thought you knew about your past, your relationships. It flips everything, even your sense of self.
Mhm.
Um, for many people, it's a relief because it's good to have that information, but there's also some grieving, just reframing everything in your past. So I also thought that was worth sharing.
Yeah.
I basically, I guess, wrote the book that I wish I had had when I was younger. And it was also just this process for me of trying to make sense of this kind of bombshell in midlife that other people are, clearly it's not, my story isn't unique.
Yeah.
So, but I had looked around and thought, no, I've seen there are parenting books out there about children with autism, and there are memoirs by autistic self advocates, but I have not seen any that sort of look at the process of having a parent who's autistic, raising an autistic child, and what all the nuances and all the overlap, and just that whole experience. To my knowledge, there's no book that really looks at that. So that was another driver of me wanting to write the memoir, and certainly of my publisher wanting to tell my story.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was so unique for me because when I was reading about it, I was like, I've never even come across anything like this before. You're right that there's been, memoirs on particular experiences and things like that. And obviously, a lot has been written on the spectrum in general. But this unique perspective, and also an encouraging one, about a mom who understands on a very personal level what her child is going through, but at the same time has a child and is going through life with this desire to thrive, not just live. Um, can I ask, did you, like, just from your opinion, because I'm noticing, and it may be that I've just been blind before, but for some reason in my sphere, I'm getting more and more people telling me about this diagnosis later in life. And is it because, like, why is that? Is it because when they were younger, there just wasn't, nobody would offer that kind of option? Like, hey, maybe you want to see if you can get some testing done on this? Or, like, why is it that there's this resurgence coming now where it's older individuals going, hey, I've actually found that I have this diagnosis? And because now, with younger kids, they're getting diagnosed so fast with these things.
Yeah, and I think from the outside, until you really examine it, it can look like, why is there this explosion? But it's kind of, I'll try to simplify it, but it's basically several fold. So decades ago, the only people really who were diagnosed were what we would call today profoundly autistic people. So usually people who also had intellectual disability,
Okay.
mainly non-speaking. Over the years, the diagnosis, the criteria kind of expanded, um, and it included slightly older. Initially, it was only infants as well. Then it expanded to children, and I think that was maybe the early '80s, and then in the '90s, you had something called Asperger's, which is, I guess,
Yeah.
what you would see more in the media, like someone who is potentially very gifted but socially awkward. So um, just varying levels and without the kind of intellectual delay or speech delay. So still some of the hallmark issues with socializing and like repetitive behavior and stuff like that. But so basically, as the criteria expanded,
Okay.
um, it in so older people were potentially being diagnosed who were missed or didn't fit the narrow criteria
Huh.
back in the day. Certainly, I was born in the late '70s, so it just wasn't even, there was no way I would have. And also some of the many groups that were missed, lots of racialized groups were not included. Girls in particular, it was very much seen as a white boy syndrome, um, because girls, not always, but can typically present a little bit differently. And we can slip under the radar. So, a lot of my book talks about that. When you look at my childhood and some of the traits I was showing, um, some girls mask. So, there's an element of hiding it and trying to blend in. there's still some of the core issues are still there, and that's why autism is such a spectrum. But essentially, girls would get missed. In my own case, things were written off like, oh, someone being like very, very shy or like mute in certain situations. Or, I would have maybe one friend and I would study that friend. I would copy that friend. I would script what I was going to say. I would like what they liked. And, but a lot of these things were not these big outward meltdowns, or it was less visible
Sure.
sometimes than it was with boys. So it would look more, I guess, socially acceptable as well. So some interests, for example, wouldn't be like lining up trains. A girl might like be really into cats or like, I don't know, Cabbage Patch Kids, or I collected different things. And so like there are those sort of differences. So girls basically were an entire several generations of girls were missed. And now that's starting to change. So
Hmm.
although it looks, like the floodgates have opened, it's really just all these people who were missed and who didn't qualify for a diagnosis under that extremely narrow, definition of what autism was. It was like the Rain Man character, and basically nothing else. Um, mm,
Can I ask, because, I have people listen to this podcast who struggle with various mental health struggles.
mhm.
I'm one of them, anxiety. And so you're always examining, Googling, thinking, "Oh my gosh, do I have this? Do I have these conditions?" Well, so when you're talking about collecting different things or copying a friend, I want to make sure just to kind of lay out for the people listening so that no one's like freaking out inwardly. Even, and for some people, it may even be, wow, that's cool. Now I know. I'd like to go explore this further. But for people who might be more afraid of like, oh my gosh, um, what do you notice when you were a child or even teenage years whenever you started seeing these things about yourself that you came to see, okay, this was an autistic trait? And then how is that comparing it to someone who's just over analyzing, or maybe someone who struggles with OCD or obsessive thoughts, and how that kind of compares with someone who has autistic traits, which is a little different.
Yeah, and that's you know what, that's the whole, tricky thing, right, with Google and everything else, because
Yeah,
I think
you're always dying.
it's kind of a pet peeve in the autistic community as well. People say, "Oh, well, why do you need a label? Everyone's a bit autistic." And it's like, well, yeah, everyone has like maybe a tiny bit of this and a tiny bit of that because we're all human. But
Yeah.
to actually qualify for a diagnosis, it's kind of the intensity and the amount that it sort of affects your day-to-day life.
Hmm.
You have to kind of tick those boxes, but in a way that is in a more significant way. So you're not just like a bit quirky, and I think people with OCD probably get just as annoyed, Okay, bona fide OCD to have a clinical diagnosis is more than just like, oh, I don't like germs. I tend to wash
Right.
my hands a lot. It's a little bit kind of insulting, I think. I mean, it's good in some way when people do say that, because they're like, okay, they're relating to certain aspects, but they're maybe not experiencing it in a way that's as debilitating. Like they're like, oh, I don't like
Yeah.
parties either. I'm like, okay, you don't like parties, but do you like throw up before? Do you then have to like spend the next 3 days in bed and not leave your house? Or you know what I mean? It's like it's more significant challenges than just, I mean, it's nice that people want to relate, but to actually get a diagnosis, which is also why I wrestled for like 10 years before I was looking at my son going, no, there's no way, because I'm so different to him. And it was only the more I learned about uh, presentation potentially in girls, and some of the ways, there were some ways we were similar, there were some ways we were different. And I was thinking like, no, it can't be. But then I always felt like I'd have this imposter syndrome. I just needed to know for sure. And I needed kind of a rubber stamp in order to just appease my own curiosity.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't have the means, or um, have the accessibility to go through that process. But for me, I personally wanted to because I knew I would never really, it wouldn't sit well with me. And I just kind of needed to know and I needed to go through that process because it was something I was so on the fence. Like one day, oh, I absolutely am. And one day, no, I can't be.
Yeah.
Um, So, and again, I'm not the person in my 40s that I was, when I was 4 or when I was 14, even. So, just like my son, who's now 17, is not who he was at 7, and he's not who he was at like 15, even. Like people do evolve and develop. Like our nervous systems develop, our brains develop, and we also develop coping mechanisms and things. But for me, it's like, why bother doing this now? What the reason is to basically reevaluate how I think about myself. I just thought I I didn't know it was autism, but I knew there was something off. I knew I was not like other people. And why did I have such a hard time um, coping with things? Why was I always getting sick? Like every birthday party, like my own birthday parties, I'd be like throwing up. I'd have a migraine every Christmas. My mom was just like, and I was really looking forward to something and I would be throwing up, or certain environments. I'd be in, a family get together and I would just shut down. Um, and I think, what the heck is the matter with me? So
Hmm.
again, like you, I had a history of mental health challenges, had anxiety and all these things, but it wasn't telling like the full picture, I felt. And when you sort of combine all these different things, it's like, okay, this was the full picture. It's
Yeah.
autism, and it makes much more sense now. So
And
I beat myself up less, knowing you know, I still don't like it at times.
sure. Yeah.
There are things I like and things I don't like, and it's still quite frustrating, because there are days and there are limitations. It doesn't, just knowing you're autistic doesn't suddenly like make it easy. But like understanding the reasons for it is it's a game changer.
It is. And I want to say too, you know, in my story, a lot of things I struggle with are induced by anxiety. IBS, a lot of stomach issues, sometimes an avoidance of social situations because of, oh, okay, I had a panic attack in that location, don't want to go back. But what's interesting about anxiety is that usually you do know deep down. That's the thing, is that it's your body, you know it well, and you can see these patterns. And I think a lot of times I've had friends who come to me saying, they diagnosed me with anxiety, but I really don't think it is. Like, I'm not, this isn't anxiety. I had one friend in particular struggling with eating, struggling with extreme stomach pain, fatigue, and the doctor's just like, "Oh, it's just anxiety." And she's like, "It's not though. Like, I'm not an anxious, I don't struggle with anxiety. And even if this was an occurrence of anxiety, it is just too physically demanding on my body for that to be it. These aren't phases. This is a constant for me." And so I think it's so important. And I think one thing that's really neat about your story is like there is this, our bodies have been made to realize when something's wrong. And so it's really good to listen to your body because, yeah, you might need direction about the anxiety. It's true. Maybe it's not something that's hitting you. But also, if you're like, I really don't think it is, and like deep seated, you're noticing these things, you're talking with people, and you're like, I don't agree with this doctor. Like, I think that's such a gift that there are so many people you can go to and figure it out. And sometimes it's a really long journey, which upsets me. I wish it was faster. I do, but unfortunately, there's so many, like insurance, all these things that cause a diagnosis to take forever. But I really am grateful for the fact that you're like, okay, well, I really thought about it and I wanted to press forward and figure this out, even though, yeah, maybe you have anxiety too, but these other things were not fitting in to that picture. And so I wanted to ask you, as a kid, you're saying social events, you would look forward to them and they would stress you out so intensely though that you couldn't enjoy them because you're throwing up. You don't want to be your body doesn't want to be present. Um, what was a typical day like for you as a kid that was frustrating for you because you didn't understand why your other friends weren't experiencing this? And then what is it like now as an adult with autism? How does it look different? How does it look the same?
Um, I mean, this is the thing too with a lot of women until or people in general, until you have the information and you know, like a lot of women don't realize this until they're in midlife and they hit burnout.
Hmm,
Because I used to, in my 20s and 30s, just used to push, push, push and go, no, well, of course I can do what other people do. And then I would end up very ill. And I saw like no connection. It was just, well, for whatever reason, I can't do that.
hmm,
And I think now the difference is I know what I can handle if I'm going to go out and do something. Um, I mean, it's minor tweaks, right? If I know a restaurant is, I'll ask for a quiet table. If not, or my husband will take one look at me and like, okay, we have to get out of here now. So I sort of can do certain things, but I understand kind of my limitations, and I know certain environments, certain things are what my sensory issues are, and I know how much I can handle. Like my mother obviously was so much older. She would run circles around me in a day. I'd be like, okay, I'm only doing this, and then I'm leaving myself these couple days to recover or
hmm.
whatever. It's just a case of kind of knowing, um, yeah, knowing, having a better understanding of your own limits and what you need. And yeah, certain little accommodations. Work environment is a big thing. Like life radically changed for me when I worked remotely and freelanced because I was just, again, thinking, what the heck's wrong with me? I was always, always ill. I had bosses accuse me of faking it because I was genuinely ill all the time because I couldn't cope with commuting and just working in a full time like office environment.
Hmm.
So yeah, just having that information, you can kind of make these tweaks to your life, but largely it's just the understanding piece and either not pushing until you're chronically in burnout, or just beating yourself up over it. I just, yeah, just battering your self esteem because you're thinking, why can't I do? Um, why are certain environments and certain things really difficult? But it's also just, yeah, this process of getting to playing detective and knowing what are you sensitive to, what have you outgrown,
Hmm.
um, so now yeah, I think, and luckily as an adult as well, a lot changes because you can curate your environment. You can wear what you want to wear. You can eat what you want to eat. As a child, you don't have that kind of agency. So, of course, if you're made to wear the horrible thing, you're going to have a horrible tantrum, or people, they're not just going to say, oh, she's like super fussy. She's a princess. She's a picky eater. She's just being really, really difficult. She's spoiled. Why is she having these tantrums?
Hmm.
Like, it's not loud in here. It's not smelly. What's your problem? It's in your head, like a million things. You internalize all these messages that you're the problem. Um, so you definitely have an awareness that you're different. You just um, try to shut that down, and you try to blend in to the point where, yeah, I was just getting sick all the time.
So
So
what was it about the stimuli that made you sick? Was it the noise level? Was it um the amount of people in the room? Like what did you
yeah,
notice really triggered some sort of reaction?
again, and it's so variable for people on the spectrum because sensory issues are just hugely variable. Like, for instance, my son had massive issues with noise, as do I. I think for me it was noise, and it was, I wouldn't say it's the same as social anxiety. It was crowd, noise, excitement. I don't really know. I don't really know how to pinpoint it other than the fact that um like now, for instance, it does change a little bit as you grow older. Now I'm incredibly sensitive to light, and I don't think that was such an issue when I was
Hmm.
younger, but, you know, my son and I did have a lot of crossover. Like, I would never wanna go bare feet. I always had to wear I hated, like, walking on grass or sand or anything like that. I hated, like, basically being outdoors. So, again, that was just interpreted as, oh, like, she's just such a princess, and I don't know. Um, but yeah, it can change a little bit, but it's a little bit hard to analyze. I just remember that I had a hard time when I was young, and nobody really knew why. It was frustrating, I think, for my mother at times, because it's like, "Not again. Here we go." Like,
Sure.
every celebration that she's, like, in her pajamas or she's locked in her room, um, while everybody's having fun, and it was awful. It was awful for me as well. It's not that I wanted to do that on purpose. It's just, I mean, and that carried, to be honest, until I was aware of it when I got married, and I was happiest day of my life. I was very excited, but the night before I had a migraine and I threw up like 7 times, and um so that wasn't sensory. So sometimes it's like afterward, the aftermath, and sometimes it's also just the buildup. And my son was the same way. His birthday or Christmas coming up, we could, um, often the most severe, like, meltdowns or things at school or at home were, like, in the lead up to his birthday.
Hmm.
So I really don't know why. It just, that just is.
And when you talk about light, I'm
Mhm.
guessing also like flashing lights and things like that must be irritating to some degree. Um, is when you're talking about getting sick, is that usually the response you have when things are triggering for you is that usually how you react is with sickness?
Yeah, I mean, that can look very different. I didn't realize this, obviously, but I think women
Sure.
tend to either go into shutdown. There is now, like, some kind of, as I was doing a little bit of research for the book, I accidentally kind of stumbled upon some correlation to do with migraines. Um,
Hmm.
and I think maybe that's like a stress response, a physical stress response to,
Yeah.
like, the overwhelm. So it's not uncommon. People, they will either shut down and really internalize it, and they can, like, self-harm or just have kind of, something more internal, or can become more externalized and, like, look like a meltdown or a whatever, not a tantrum, but it's a similar thing. It can just get this the flips, the switch flips, and it just someone can kind of blow up. So it really depends on the person, but how it manifests. But it's usually the same sort of thing. It's like social or sensory overwhelm, and it, like you say, does something in the body and triggers you, and then eventually something happens. But, like, that's the thing. I used to just push through to the point where I would get very ill. Um, yeah.
Do you people may ask, especially, and I'm asking a lot of these questions because I want to be able to understand to some degree. I can't understand completely because I don't have autism, but I want to try to understand, which is why I'm asking these questions. So if some of them seem really ignorant, please forgive me. Um, but do you, how do you, in your mind, because I know you're saying when you push, you would get really sick. But I'm guessing there are times in your life when you have to push for some reason. Um, and so I wonder, how do you put boundaries on when you push, when you don't? If you do you have to, like, is there ever a time when you feel you need to push and keep going, even though you know you're going to have that very visceral reaction? Or have you come to a point in your life where you're like, okay, I have these boundaries, and no matter what happens, I'm going to stay within these? Like, how do you figure that out for yourself?
Um, Yeah, like, I think it's just been a process, again, of being lucky that I'm a certain age and I have agency, and I've kind of had to make my life a lot smaller and make those decisions. So even though it's not always fun, like, traveling is very hard, and that's a situation that is really difficult because you wanna travel, but the minute you're at an airport or whatever, um, you're not in control. Your flight's delayed or,
Yeah,
um we do what we can, or I can maybe go to a lounge, or I can find a quiet spot in the airport away from everyone. I can wear noise canceling headphones. I can do all these things, but ultimately, yeah, there are situations where you can't fully control all the variables. I do the best I can to kind of curate my life a certain way. And I'm very lucky I don't have to work in an office now. I have supports and like knowing what I know now, I do my best to kind of shape things, but there are still times like I had my mother-in-law here visiting and I took her to a cafe and the wait was very long to get we were just getting a little bite to eat. And it took I was just felt I had to just say to her, I'm really sorry. I have to get out of here right now. And
mm,
she understood, but she was a bit like, oh, okay. And I had to get her up and just get out of there. And
yeah,
sometimes you can't control everything, despite being informed and knowing. That's just life. But so I try, obviously, to like mitigate what I can. And the same for my son, as a parent, you sort of get to know like that's going to be a disaster. I can take them there, but then I can't take them right there afterwards. Like we can do this one thing and we pack all the stuff and we best laid plans and everything else. And it would still happen throughout his childhood, right? Everything's going great suddenly and the switch went and then he's having a colossal meltdown at the restaurant. Like
yeah,
I don't want to give too many spoilers in the book, but we have having this amazing day, and I don't know whether it was just too much, it was the heat, there were a lot of variables, and he got an ice cream coming out to him, and it was like little dry smoke. It was like a little thing, and he lost his mind screaming, and it was really stressful.
mm,
And yeah, as a parent, it's tough because you try to put all these things in place, but sometimes things still happen. And it made us kind of reticent to going out and doing things, which was too bad. Um, but it's incredibly stressful. So, as much as you can know someone and try to mitigate things, stuff will still happen publicly sometimes. It's very hard.
yeah,
Like, I'm very lucky I have a supportive partner.
hmm,
Um, who knows me really well and think, okay, will just sort of look at me and go, I have to get
yeah.
you out of here now. Or, how are you going to manage that? And like really does a lot to support me because we've been together a very long time. Um, so yeah, I'm very lucky in that regard. That definitely helps.
Well, I want to encourage listeners too, because I know there may be some parents listening who are thinking, oh, I wonder if I've mistook. This was what I would think if I had a kid. I could be prompted to think, I wonder if I've mistaken disobedience for autism. Um, because I know it can, obviously typical kids also have tantrums. And can also just be having a really bad day and suddenly just, become very stressful to be with and extremely loud and just difficult. And so I want to give grace for the fact that I would think as a parent, and maybe you can speak to this, it's hard to know. I mean, it's not like you're going to automatically know right away. Oh, my kid has autism. He's not being disobedient. So therefore, I'm going to address this differently. So I want to ask you, like, how did you navigate knowing, okay, I think this is disobedience or like outright, like, I just don't want to do this, or I'm fighting back against something that you've asked me to do? Or is it more of, okay, it's the environment he's in, or it's something going on internally that I can't. It has nothing to do with me. It's just what's going on. How did you get to a point where you felt you could kind of, um, tell the difference, or at least have some grace for the fact that, "Okay, this is what I think. So I'm gonna go act on this particular thought." Because I could know that parents are gonna beat themselves up about this, and I remember when I was working with kids with special needs while I was in college, it was really difficult for parents. They were always guilt-ridden because some of them felt it was their fault that their kids had any sort of emotional or mental struggle. Um, and they were just, at the tip of a hat, could become very emotional because it was very difficult for them, obviously, and they're very stressed. And so, how can you speak to that from your own experience of being a parent?
Sure. Yeah, probably not always easy to navigate that. Um, I think I definitely always had this layer of empathy because a lot of things even though some things, the way I was externalizing it was not the same way my son was, but in a lot of other respects, I definitely had a lot of time and empathy for the sensory issues, in particular, and the anxiety. My son has a lot of anxiety as well, but it just shows up very differently. Um, and this is the thing, it's always really hard to figure this stuff out as a parent. You're always playing detective because the triggers can be building up from like yesterday or something that happened, at breakfast. And then suddenly it's, I think, especially with schools, it's often been really difficult. It's like they'll say, oh, well, this happened and then your kid did this. And it's like, well, really looking back, like, what was it? Was it the temperature there? I don't know. Did something happen, 2 periods ago that may have set them off? And it's something I still rally against because my son really does still struggle with regulating his nervous system. And it's often, schools especially will treat that, will punish that. And they won't look at it in the same way. For instance, if a child's having a panic attack or, is like picking at their skin or like some kind of self injury, people would tend to be very sympathetic to that as opposed to the child who's like kicking you or spitting
Right.
at you. And even as a parent, that's difficult to sort of keep that in mind that it's coming out maybe in a way that isn't very nice and isn't very palatable, but it's the same kind of dysregulation going on, and you need to like model co-regulation and support rather than discipline. It's not Discipline is not effective when someone's having a meltdown. It's like treating one medical condition with something totally different. Like I can't think of a good analogy, but it can kind of look like this big tantrum, but the causes and reasons for it are largely beyond the kid's control. And then afterwards, there's so much shame. So if we're constantly punishing kids for things that they can't actually control because of their neurology and their physiological system, like a lot of the stuff, I think there's research about the amygdala, and um, they're basically more in the reptilian brain. So my son especially really just struggled to regulate, more than a child his age, let's say.
Yeah.
So it's not because he didn't want to, it's like physiologically his nervous system was like really in fight or flight, and that was his like big reaction.
Yeah.
Um, so it's very, very tricky, and it's very tough as a parent, but it's also very frustrating when you see schools like repeatedly just punishing your kid for an expression of their disability or their body that they can't actually, they're not in control of in the moment.
Yeah. I think I know that for some families, and I would as a mom, it's like, how do I teach my child, even if they have autism, to regulate their emotions? Because if they're out in public and I'm not with them to explain, or, they're 25 and God forbid I'm dead, and there's nobody there, how are they going to be able to express to someone, I have this, therefore I need this? And especially if a child is nonverbal, that's even extra hard because it's either like teaching. I remember, when I was teaching kids how to use iPads, how to use pictures, something to communicate, especially if they were nonverbal, how they were feeling so that you could give them that space. Um, I wonder if, like, even for you, if you've been able to see this or even a way that's been encouraging to you, if you have a parent ask you, is there a way to help my child learn regulating their emotions? Because, like you said, they can't always control that this huge explosive feeling is going to overpower them. But is there anything that or is there hope for a parent who may be asking, is there any way my child can learn somehow to regulate their emotion, whether it be going to another room or going to a place where they can express those feelings in a safe place where they're not going to hurt someone, so
Mhm.
forth? Because I think it's interesting. I think naturally, when someone attacks or kicks, we go into our own fight or flight response mode because we don't want to get hurt. And also it can be triggering, like for me, long story, but like growing up in an abusive home, it would be triggering if suddenly somebody just exploded. And you're like, oh my gosh, like are they like coming at me because they like want to hurt me? And then having to separate, no, they actually have, this has nothing to do with you. Like really nothing to do with your personality. But it's just so many variables, like you said, that cannot be controlled at all times. But I just wondered if you have any encouragement of, is there a way for my child to be able to regulate to some degree so that they're not completely helpless when this happens?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know what? It's a process. And I've had times thinking, dark times thinking, is this ever going to get any better? But largely, like, you can teach those skills, but you have to not teach them in the heat of the moment. You have to, I think the idea is to keep the connection as well, because you're right, you're fighting your own instinct for protection. And the last thing you also want to do is connect with someone who's attacking you. It's this very
It's true.
horrible,
So
weird
hard.
thing. It's your child, but so you have to find a way to sort of keep safe. But I mean, this is quite personal, but in our situation, it was very much like stop speaking, because that you can't access language when you're
Right.
in that moment. So
Hmm.
there's no point in like, oh, take deep breaths, or start to correct someone or say, don't do that, or start getting angry with them, which just raises it even more. So
Sure.
people do say, like, make sure you're safe in the environment, but you stay kind of in some kind of proximity with them, and then just wait and be with them to help them calm down. And then later is when the teaching comes in, whether it's the next day or a couple hours later, because
Right.
nobody in fight or flight can take in information. You can't access any of
True.
that in the moment, and both of you frankly are in fight or flight, so it's not the time. But your kid also know, my son would say, like, do you still love me afterwards? It was heartbreaking. It was like, of course I still love you, but there's so much shame. Kids feel awful after a meltdown. They'll see what they may not even realize in the moment, and they'll see, oh no, I cut your arm, or I bruised you, or I broke something. They feel
Mm.
awful. So the connection piece is really, really important, but the teaching does happen. But I honestly feel like um, it's moved on a lot for us. And some of that genuinely is physiological, like
Sure.
your
Yeah.
nervous system just also developing. So I think he's got a much better handle on it. But I don't know if he could have made some of those improvements before, like, biologically he had matured to a certain extent. So because we
It's
had
true.
therapists teaching him everything, but at a certain point he just couldn't really do that. And now it's very, very different. He's still easily dysregulated, but the first instinct is not, you know, that he's going to throw something, or like it's not as explosive as it is. He has gained some control, which thank goodness, because he's way bigger than I am. So I think there is hope for that, but it's very, and again, this is a whole area
Yeah.
that a lot of parents and even in the autistic community is not really spoken about. Like I talk about a bit about aggression and that stuff in my book because not all kids go through that. Some are self-injurious, and some have more like communication challenges, and but some don't. You know, it doesn't manifest in the same way for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think to me that was even further isolating for parents who are going through that because they feel like you retreat a lot. You think, well, we can't get together with other people. What if there's a meltdown? We feel nervous going in public. What if there's a big meltdown and something happens? So your world really shrinks and you feel very isolated. And not a lot of people, even within the autism community, necessarily relate to you.
Yeah.
So it's a horrible feeling. So that was something I definitely wanted to make a point to talk about, so that because that's definitely what we experienced. And
You know,
again, with people not treating it like it's something to be punished or disciplined, because it's not the same, and it's not effective, because that assumes someone is in control of their actions and is not in that flight or flight mode.
I think it's so interesting because, um, I think you're very right that there is this desire to retreat because you don't wanna hurt people or offend them. You don't want anyone to get you don't want your child to be embarrassed, you don't wanna be embarrassed, you don't want other people to be embarrassed. It's very complicated and layered, but I think there is such a beauty to being able to be honest and being like, "Okay, my child struggles with this. And so if we're gonna come to this event, I just want you to know, like, there can't be all these variables I can control, and maybe I want my child to come and be able to see his or her friend, but maybe it's gonna be really hard." And I think it's it's a good thing that this is being talked about because it's something that people can ponder and try to grow in compassion for these difficult situations that outwardly look really fixable or odd. But if you're in the situation, it's not black and white or like one, two, three, everything's good now.
Mhm.
And so I, one reason it was such a delight to see you writing about this and the vulnerability of it is a desire for people to be able to look at things from a different perspective. Um, and that's so important. And that's where, true authenticity is to have compassion for things that you don't understand or necessarily even agree with, being able to give that space. And so your story is such a gift and empowering. And I know it's really difficult and you can't even express all of it in a book, but I'm so grateful that, we got this conversation. And also, I'm really hopeful that people will buy your book or even people who are thinking, wondering if this is something going on in their family can explore the idea and it not be obviously there will be a grief hit, but it won't be the end of the world because there is hope and encouragement like you're talking about. Like there are really hard seasons, but also there's a community and there are people that know what you're going through. And that's so important.
Well, the thing is too, people would be, I think the surprising thing is, like my editor said, she said, your book is so funny. There is so much humor in it that you wouldn't necessarily expect. She said, I'm dead inside. And she said, I cried with laughter so often. And to me, that was important to give some levity because I'm like, autism is not all doom and gloom all the time. Yes, there are moments that are hard for me personally. There are moments that are hard for my son. There are situations, obviously, I'm not making it out like it's not a superpower, but it's also not a tragedy. It can be
Hmm.
Really,
Very good.
we
That's
have a
good.
lot of fun as a family. Like, my son is hilarious. If you read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about. I have a whole chapter. Um, lots of funny stuff happens. And like you say, this is, I think, why people write and read memoir. I would hope that the people who pick up the book aren't just the people who have a child with autism, or, I would hope, or not even just parents. I had a reader come to me and say, retired couple traveling and all this stuff, never had kids. And they're like, this was so fascinating because it's so
Mm,
far out of their understanding. But that is what we need. We need people reading other people's stories, understanding what their lives are like, so that then when you do see someone, you're not passing all that judgment necessarily. You're growing and you're seeing what it is to walk in someone else's shoes, even if the experience is so far removed from yours. I would hope that the people who do read this book are people who have no connection to autism. Like, that probably won't be the case, but I would, in an ideal world, that's what I would like to happen. Obviously, I want people who do, parents who are going through it and who feel alone, I want them to feel seen, and the book is for them as well. But, ideally, it would be amazing if people who really don't know much about autism come away with an understanding of. And again, this is two people with autism. This is our family, very different from the next family. But yeah, it's very important to me that it's not a doom and gloom book. It's the overall message is acceptance, and it's not, this is a tragedy. It's not something to be overcome.
mm.
Um, the end goal is not to fix my son. It's not to fix me. We have a great family, and we have struggles like everybody else, but there's also a lot of good times and humor. We're complex people, right? We're not stereotypes. It's not all what you see on TV.
Yeah. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Julie. This was a gift. And thanks for doing an interview with me. I don't know how
Thank you.
uncomfortable or comfortable this was for you, but I'm very grateful.
Um, I'm getting I've done a lot of podcasts now, and they're definitely much more in my comfort zone than like something in person,
Oh,
for
good.
sure. So, because I can I'm fidgeting like constantly, and like,
Oh, you should see my feet
um
right now. I'm moving a lot too.
yeah, and it's like, it's not, to me, this is also not real eye contact. It sounds weird. A lot of people hate Zoom and they hate the camera calls, but for me, it's actually, it's still very tiring, but it's a lot less overwhelming. Like, it feels more manageable than other media,
Well, good.
for
Well,
example.
thank you, Julie. This was a gift. Thank you
Thank you
so
for
much.
having me. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation.
You're welcome.
And
Bye.
I hope you enjoy it when
I
you get to
will.
it.
I will.